Hello and welcome to Christ Church Leadership Podcast. We are delighted that you're with us today. I'm Charles Kyker, your host, and today I want to talk about the tension between innovation and success. The tension that exists between innovation and success. We would think, well, there can't be any tension, surely, because if you innovate and you innovate often, you'll be successful. But there's a great deal of tension between innovation and success if you really think about it and unpack it. To innovate is to foster creativity. Let's define innovate first. Find new ways to fulfill the mission and vision of the organization. What is missing is the question you often ask. What's missing here? What do we need to do differently? What people group are we not reaching? What service could we provide? What niche could we move into that nobody's really addressing right now, or nobody's really addressing? How could we meet that niche? What is not firing on all cylinders? You have to ask those questions. And so how can we innovate and make sure that we're firing on all cylinders, to use that expression? What needs improvement? Perhaps what needs to be let go of to do something differently than what we've done before. At Christ Church, we've used the adage, what funerals do we need to hold? What ministries do we need to bury? What practices do we need to no longer perform? And so you just say a blessing over it and you let it go. We're not going to do that anymore. It's no longer productive. Now let's define success. Success is what has gotten you to where you are. If you are at a place, if you've arrived at some place of completion, or you've accomplished something. Going for excellence, seeking to perform better than the competition. And once the organization grows, then once you've become successful, guess what happens? That success has to be what? It has to be managed. As it grows, there must be procedures and policies. And before we know it, success becomes an enemy of innovation. The more successful you become, the less likely you are to innovate. Believe it or not, in the New Testament, there's a powerful illustration of this. As in Hebrews 8, it talks about the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. So let's look at Hebrews chapter 8 as we're talking about the Old Covenant versus the New Covenant. Here's the main point. Now, anytime an author says that in the Word of God, that's when you get your notepad out. That's when you get your pen out. Here is the main point, the writer of Hebrews says, verse 1, we have a high priest who sat down in the place of honor beside the throne of the majestic God in heaven. There he ministers in the heavenly tabernacle. The true place of worship was built by the Lord and not by human hands. And since every high priest is required to offer gifts and sacrifices, our high priest must make an offering too. If he were here on earth, he would not even be a priest, since there already are priests who offer the gifts required by the law. They serve in a system of worship that is only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. For when Moses was getting ready to build the tabernacle, God gave him this warning, quote, be sure that you make everything according to the pattern that I have shown you here on this mountain, end of quote. But now Jesus, our high priest, has been given a ministry that's far superior to the old priesthood. For he is the one who mediates for us as a far better covenant with God, based on better promises. And the first covenant had been faultless. If the first covenant had been faultless, then there would have been no need for a second covenant to replace it. But when God found fault with the people, he said, the day is coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. This covenant will not be like the one I made with their ancestors, when I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt. They did not remain faithful to my covenant, so I turned back on them, says the Lord. But this is the new covenant I will make with the people of Israel on that day, says the Lord. I'll put my laws in their minds, and I will write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. And they will not need to teach their neighbors, nor will they need to teach their relatives, saying, you should know the Lord. For everyone from the least to the greatest will know me already, and I will forgive their wickedness, and I will never again remember their sins. When God speaks of a new covenant, verse 13, it means he has made the first one obsolete. It is now out of date, and it will soon disappear. According to Isaiah 40 and 1 Peter, the grass will one day wither, and flowers, one day they are going to fade away. But this word of the living God, it will stand forever. Thanks be to God. So in the Life Application Bible, I love how this scholar puts these juxtaposed to one another. He starts out with the Old Testament column. So you got the Old Testament column here, and then you've got the New Testament column. Old Testament column on the left, New Testament, of course, on the right. Those are your two columns. Underneath the Old Testament covenant, the Old Covenant under Moses, so you've got the Old Covenant under Moses, it says gifts and sacrifices by those who are guilty. Under the New Covenant under Christ, it says self-sacrifice by the guiltless Christ. So you've got those of us that are in need of forgiveness. Sacrifices have to be made under the Old Covenant of Moses. Under the New Covenant, under Christ, it's self-sacrifice by the guiltless Christ. So Jesus is the supreme leader and really the only one who can give the ultimate sacrifice. That's how the New Covenant could even come into being. Okay? So that, again, number two under the Old Covenant of Moses is a shadow. A shadow. Under the New Covenant, a reality. You've got a shadow of things, but under Christ, you have a reality. Under the Old Covenant, limited promises. Under the New Covenant, limitless promises. There's no limit to the promises of God under Jesus Christ and the capacity for him to bring new life. Under the Old Covenant of Moses, failed agreement by the people. Failed agreement by the people. They broke God's law. Under the New Covenant, under Christ, faithful agreement by Christ. Faithful agreement by Christ. Now, going out of chapter 8, I've got chapter 9, verse 1. Under the Old Covenant, external standards and rules. External standards and rules. Under the New Covenant, internal standards and a new heart. Internal standards and a new heart. In other words, it's hard to fulfill the Old Covenant when you don't have a relationship with the living God. If you don't love God, why would you even want to keep the Ten Commandments? Come on, somebody. If you don't love God, you're not going to want to honor the Sabbath day, because honoring the Sabbath day is all about worshiping who? Worshiping God. If God is your provider, if God is your security, if God is the person you ultimately trust, if God is someone you love, you can't wait to get to a house of God. You can't wait to be in his presence. It's all about a relationship. And so I love that. External standards and rules, and then in the New Covenant, internal standards and a new heart. And then limited access to God under the Old Covenant. Limited access to God. Remember, that's the power of the torn veil or the curtain when Jesus breathed his last and said, "It is finished." Only one person could go back into the Holy of Holies and offer sacrifices on behalf of the people. But when Jesus bar Joseph, the Son of the living God, breathed his last and said, "It is finished," the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then, under New Covenant, you guessed it, unlimited access. Unlimited access to God. Well, that is powerful to me, and we could almost say amen, and that would be enough to think on. But let's pragmatically bring this to your leadership and to where you're living right now, whether you're in business, you run a company, you're a manager, you're a supervisor, maybe you work on an assembly line, maybe you're a salesperson, whatever it is that you do, or maybe you're in a nonprofit or a local church. I want to bring up a book that was published in 1982, and it's called In Search of Excellence. In Search of Excellence. And I want to go over a few things that are directly related to this Old and New Covenant, directly related to the theme that we started with, and that is the tension between innovation and success. So let's go to In Search of Excellence, and I'm just going to give you a very brief summary that hopefully it'll give us something to think about. But in this book that the authors do a great job. Now, this is Thomas Peters and Robert Waterman. Thomas Peters and Robert Waterman published this book in 1982. It's about 360 pages, published by Harper and Row, but it is packed full of, back then it was called management, developing management skills, but really it was about leadership. And the sad reality of it is most colleges and universities today will have classes on leadership. But what are they really teaching? They're teaching management. Most people don't have a clue what leadership really is. You want to find out what leadership is, you run a nonprofit or a local church. You'll find out what leadership is. If I was a general in the Army, I could court-martial you if you did not fulfill my direct order. If I ran a Fortune 500 company and you refused to do what I asked you to do as the CEO or the manager of that company, I could either dock your pay, I could demote you. There's lots of things I could do. But in the local church, you ask somebody to do something and they don't do it, then what are you going to do? Well, you've got to have standards of excellence that people want to strive towards, but at the end of the day, they follow you because they trust you. They follow you because they believe in your vision or your mission and what you're doing. And they believe that what you do matters, and they want to be a part of what matters. People vote with their feet in a nonprofit or a local church. And so one leadership guru, I'll say, that I've followed for 30 plus years now said it right. The most leadership-intensive organization on planet Earth is the local church. It just is. And so as I read these 6 details here, I'm just thinking that Peters and Waterman wrote, I think this really is about leadership, even though in the day in 1982, people like Peter Drucker were writing books on management. But what they're talking about really is leadership. All right. So they're talking about looking at average return and equity over a 20-year period on outstanding companies, kind of like Jim Collins in his book Good to Great. But Harper and Row published this book, of course, from these two authors about a 20-year period and which companies provided excellence in their return and their growth, etc. So they mentioned 3M, IBM, Delta Airlines, Hewlett-Packard, and McDonald's in their day. All right? So they said, here are some of the principles. Number 1, a bias for action. A bias for action. Do it, try it, don't analyze the problem to death. The quote is on page 74, you're more likely to act yourself into feeling than feel yourself into action. Again, page 74, you're more likely to act yourself into feeling than to feel yourself into action. A lot of times we hesitate to act because of fear of failure. We want to be successful. We want to make sure that whatever we do is accomplished. But these companies have a bias towards action. They see a need that needs to be met, they act on it. They see a niche that needs to be filled or addressed, they act. They have a bias towards action. Thriving, vital churches, nonprofits, they have a bias towards action. Here, successful companies, they have a bias towards action. Number 2, close to the customer. Close to the customer. I thought this was quite profound for nonprofits and churches. You would think that we would actually shine in this area. But really, I think the truth of the matter is not so much. Not so much. Because if we really shined in this area, the average church in America wouldn't be 75 or less. That's just an observation on my part. Don't mean to hurt any feelings from anybody that's listened to the podcast. But if we really shined in this area, Why would the average church in America, over 70%, be 75 or less in attendance? Well, let's look at what they say. Close to the customer. Quote on page 170, if you can't understand the customers, you won't understand the business. The answer on how much service is enough or what kind of quality is right lies in the marketplace. Do you know your customers? Do you listen to people? Do you spend time with them? One of the reasons why I try to at least 3, if not 4, but usually it averages out to about 3 Thursdays a month, I block out, my pastoral administrator blocks out 4 hours for me, typically on Thursday afternoons. And I counsel people. I meet with people. I listen to people. I do pre-marriage counseling. I do marriage counseling to help people stay married. I talk to people about their challenges and their spiritual growth. I talk to people about how they feel far from God and feel distant, and they would like to get back to feeling close to God. I talk about people that have issues with their work situation, and they want somebody to give them an idea about how to improve in this particular situation. I talk to people about problems they have in their families and the brokenness and chaos and dysfunction that's going on, and how do I navigate that? Folks, what I'm saying is, if most senior pastors who get over a size of a church our size, over 2,000, when you get in what they call mega church size, most consultants will tell you, delegate, 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 delegate. Let me tell you something you can never, ever delegate, and that is understanding where your people are suffering, where they're hurting, where they're challenged, where they need to know the presence of God. And if I don't talk to people, if I don't avail myself to people, I won't know how to preach. I won't know my audience. And you've got to take the veil back, and you've got to find ways that you interface and you interact with people so you know what their struggles are. You know what their challenges are. There are things that you do need to delegate. I don't mean to diminish the consultants. There are things you do need to delegate. There are things you need to share. But there are some things you can't delegate. There are some things you can't farm out. And every leader needs a little bit of time with the average person each week. Now, I have to limit it because otherwise I can't prepare messages. I can't meet with senior leaders. I can't do a lot of things that I need to do. But I try to have a little bit of time where I'm interfacing with people. How about you? Are you listening to the people that you're supposed to be serving? Are you listening to their family members? Are you listening to their struggles? Number 3, autonomy and entrepreneurship. Autonomy and entrepreneurship. The quote here is on page 208. Innovation success is a numbers game. Make sure you generate a reasonable number of mistakes. If you're going to be successful, if you're going to be entrepreneurial, you're going to have failures. Come on, somebody. If you're going to take the hill and you're going to take some ground, you're going to have some missteps. You're not going to get it right every time. Now that doesn't mean be foolish and don't have a plan. It doesn't mean don't think it through, don't strategize, don't call, as Proverbs says, wise people around the table to try to get wisdom before you launch something or do something. But at the end of the day, you do your homework, you do your due diligence, you meet with people, you talk with experts, you get consultants, whatever you need to do. But then eventually you got to do number 1, right? You got to lean in towards action. You got to have a bias for action. And after you've done your homework, your due diligence, take a risk, step forward. If you're going to succeed, you're going to have some mistakes along the way. So the answer, how much, the actual idea is make sure you generate a reasonable number of mistakes. And then the well-run companies foster innovation through skunk works. Skunk works. That's a mythology and role models. It's suboptimal division, internal competition. The market is brought inside, and an intense communication system. So that's what they call skunk works. You've got to bring the model inside. It's suboptimal division, internal competition. The market is brought inside. You've got to think this through. You've got to process it. You've got to have room for pushback. I talked to a leader a couple weeks ago that had, during a meeting, had actually made a challenge towards something. And he met with me a few days after that and said, I just want to let you know, I hope you know I wasn't trying to be problematic or what. And I said, no. I'm glad that you felt like you could give some pushback because the best ideas, Patrick Lencioni says, the best ideas will always surface to the top if you allow for pushback. If you don't allow for pushback and feedback, how are you going to get the best ideas to surface at the top? The other thing is, if a leader doesn't allow pushback or feedback, then evidently the leader thinks she or he has all the best ideas and nobody else has any good ideas. And that's just not true. In fact, that's quite foolish. So you want to give an environment for pushback. You want to give an environment for feedback. Obviously, it needs to be done respectful, and obviously it needs to be done with the idea of the betterment of the whole. Now listen to this. Juxtaposed to that, the other side of that's true. If you have worked together with a group of people and you've built trust over time and you've worked together on projects and you've gotten to know each other and you've gotten to know how she or he leads, then once you build trust and once you build a sense of appreciation that the 8 people around the table have total buy-in for the mission, total buy-in for the DNA, with trust, you can move faster. With trust, you can be more effective and efficient. When there's a great deal of distrust around the table, you are moving at the pace of a crawl at best. And then everybody's looking over their shoulder and second guessing the next person. So if you've got a high level of trust, you'll move faster, juxtaposed to having distrust and not trusting the people and wondering, is there just a bunch of yes people around the table? Well, it's not so much yes people, it's that we've all said yes to the mission and the vision. And once we've worked together for a while and we've built some trust and rapport, I know his heart's in the right place. I know her spirit is aligned with our mission. So therefore, you give more trust and you trust more to allow people to get things done. I believe that's true. All right, number 4, productivity through people. Productivity through people. Again, that ought to be a given in a nonprofit or a local church, or even should be a non-given today in our workplace and environment, but often it's not. The excellent companies treat their employees, not technology. I thought that's pretty cool back in 1982. The excellent companies treat their employees, not technology, as the root source of quality and productivity gains. In other words, your most valuable asset's your people, not your technology, not your systems, not even the product or the service that you provide. Your most valuable commodity is your people. Do you focus your energy in that direction? That your people matter? Do they feel that? At the root source of quality and productivity gains, here's the quote from page 242. Respect for the individual is a central belief. The key to a people orientation is trust and a great number of people programs. Let's do that quote again on page 242. Respect for the individual is a central belief. The key to a people orientation is trust and a great number of people programs. Number 5 is hands-on, value-driven. Hands-on, value-driven. Now, they have an acronym or abbreviation M as in mother, B as in boy, W as in Walter, and A as in apple. MBWA, management by wandering around. Management by wandering around. That's hands-on, value-driven. John Maxwell would call that walking slowly through the crowd. Quote here from page 280. If asked to provide an all-purpose bit of advice, we might be tempted to reply, figure out your value system. Decide what your company stands for. Set and demand, S-E-T, and demand standards of excellence. Anybody who accepts mediocrity in school, in job, in life, is a guy who compromises. And when the leader compromises, the whole DAMN organization compromises. You can tell the person was a little bit passionate about that. The guy who compromises allows mediocrity into his area of oversight, his area of production or service, or her area of ministry, or her area of focus. And so the idea is you have hands-on, value-driven. So you're walking around, management by wandering around. So you're checking the value. You're checking is this being done well? Is this being done with excellence? Are we providing the best service that we possibly can? We've said that at Christ Church for years. If you expect absolutely nothing from people who join your church, guess what that person gets? Absolutely nothing. They get nothing because nothing's expected of them. How could they get anything if you don't expect a certain standard from people who belong to your organization? Secondly, the organization gets nothing. The local church gets nothing. And thirdly, the community gets nothing. And fourthly, lost people get nothing. They get absolutely nothing. So why would you expect nothing from your organization? And the reality of it is some people actually have something they say up front, but then they don't hold them accountable. There's no accountability built in. Are you part of a life group? You're expected to be. You said you would be when you joined, so we're holding you accountable. If you're not a part of a life group, we're just sending you a letter letting you know we've got many that meet in your area, and we'd love for you to go ahead and follow through with your commitment to be a devoted follower of Christ Church and join a life group. Are you serving? And if you're not serving in some ministry, let us know how we could creatively work with you in your schedule to help you have hands-on experience in loving another person through service. Because the great commandment is to love God and love people. And if you're not willing to serve, you're not willing to love people. And that is the antithesis of what it means to follow Jesus. In other words, that's the opposite. So you either hold the standard up or you don't. And if you don't, then you compromise. And if people know you compromise, they can't trust you. But if you hold the standard up, and see, over the years, the 25 years I've been here, Christ Church has often been criticized because we have a high standard. And it's from Christ Church's high standard that we've been able to reach thousands of unchurched people for the glory of God and help many people develop and become leaders of ministries. And now we've got people who lead worship services, who are serving other churches, who have launched other churches. We've got people involved in ministry because we believed in a high standard that Jesus himself lifted up to the disciples. And having excellence is vitally important. Number 6, stick to knitting. Stick to knitting, Knitting. Stick to knitting. A quote from page 293, never acquire a business you don't know how to run. Never acquire a business you don't know how to run. The qualitative guiding value and the hands-on approach are at war with diversification. Diversification dilutes the guiding qualitative theme, in part because the acquired firm undoubtedly has different shared values, but also because themes such as quality tend to lose meaning when the organization strays far afield. What's he talking about? Later, Jim Collins would tag this what? The hedgehog principle. The hedgehog principle. Stick to what you know. Stick to what you do well. Make sure you give that absolute focus and unwavering commitment. Stick to your hedgehog principle. That's what they mean by knitting. If you know how to knit something, stick to knitting. Stick to what you know. Stick to what you do well. And have an unwavering commitment to do it with excellence. And all too often, we dilute things because we take on way too much. Most churches are taking on way too much. They're taking on way too much. We've tried to keep it simple here at Christ Church. We focus on worship, and we focus on being involved in life groups. We focus on serving because we believe that's vitally important. And we're upping the ante on prayer, asking people to be in prayer for the mission of the church, for its leaders, as well as interceding on behalf of others. We focus on inviting, because if you don't build an invitational ethos in the life of a nonprofit or a church, you won't have volunteers, you won't have new blood, you won't have new people, and pretty soon you'll be dead in the water. And then we focus on tithing, which is a spiritual discipline to give and to give to God, and to be generous, because if your people aren't generous, you won't have a spirit of generosity out in the marketplace. You won't talk to people, you won't invest in people. Generosity flows not just financially, but it flows emotionally, spiritually, and there can be a contagion in generosity. Today, it's called paying it forward. Today, there's lots of different synonyms for it, but all of that stems from a heart of generosity. And so you want people to have a spirit of generosity, but it starts in the heart, and often it starts with putting God at the first place in your finances. So these are some things to hopefully stir us and to challenge us to realize that the more successful you become, the more tempted you are to manage the organization, manage the people, get more policies in place, et cetera, et cetera. And what we often do is we take our eye off the ball of innovation, creativity, starting things new, being willing to take risk. And a certain amount of administration and a certain amount of whatever is involved in any organization, that's important to realize, but it should never keep us from the spirit of innovation and accomplishing our mission and what we're here to do. And so those are always in tension. That's why I think we've got to be even more focused on innovation, creativity, in order to balance out what our default would be, and that is to just maintain. And if you just maintain, you're plateaued. And you plateau long enough, you'll start decline. So thank you for joining us for this Leadership Podcast. I wish you well and God's blessings in the days and weeks ahead.